All right, good morning everybody. Thank you for joining us today for another KeyShot webinar. We're going to let people trickle in here for the next few minutes, but let me tell you a little bit about myself first. My name is Rex Roberts and I'm the intern here at Luxion. I've been working with KeyShot software for a couple years now, but these past few months I've been getting quite in depth with the software, so hopefully the little tips and tricks that I've learned along the way can be helpful for everyone out there as well. So today I'll be sharing some of those tips and tricks and basically just give you a run through of my own personal workflow when working with the KeyShot software in regards to product design and smaller consumer electronics. I am a senior, or I will be a senior, at Long Beach State, and I'm in the industrial design program with a minor in marketing. So KeyShot is definitely a tool that I use and I plan on using in the future. So all right, let's go ahead and get started here. We have just about 100 attendees. And for my first time doing this is pretty exciting, a little nervous, but I'm sure we'll be fine. Okay, so everyone saw this scene that I set up with these Sony headphones I designed for one of my classes. And I'm going to give you a run through of pretty much start to finish how I go about prepare my model in SolidWorks and bring it into KeyShot, assigning materials, dealing with the environment and lighting. So yeah, hopefully this is helpful to not only beginners but also some intermediate and advanced users. I'll be telling you some little tips and tricks and things you might not know. All right, let's go ahead and get started here. So let's open SolidWorks. And as you can see, we have our headphones in a part file here in SolidWorks. And I haven't applied any colors to the materials yet, so I'm going to show you guys how I go about doing that. You could always import your model into KeyShot like this, but you won't have any definition between different materials. They'll all be linked together as one. You could always go into your scene tree in KeyShot here and select your models and unlink materials for all the models. That way start from scratch and apply the materials needed. But it's a lot easier to set that up in the modeling software, bring that into KeyShot, speeds up your workflow a bit. So usually what I do is I'll organize my parts into subfolders here. So to add a color to this, to my pads here, the left and right pad, you can select both of these using the shift key, and then you see this little dialog comes up and you have your appearances ball. So then we can go down to the body level of this material and we'll set that to be a black. And then you could also do it another way by pressing your edit appearance button here, and we can clear these selections. You can see here this selected geometry window allows for part, face, surface, body, and feature. So if we have this box highlighted here, we can come in and first we'll have to set what we want here. So I'm going to go by bodies, and I know this is a body here, here, on the underside and here. So we'll color that a gray. Alright, so let's just continue quickly with the rest of these materials. We have our white plastic. Go to the body level, make that a white. And sometimes you might see bright colors, and that's just to show the difference, a clear difference between the materials. So for here, we want to make this a blue. Now, if you're choosing two colors that are close to each other, KeyShot might confuse that. So it's best to choose colors that are quite different. But personally, I like to set this up, get an idea for what the colors will be once I bring it into KeyShot as well. Have our power button. Make that yellow so it stands out. Our Sony logo. We have our housing here. This display is actually a screen that will be a different material, so I'm going to deselect that. Okay. Get my display. And then let's hide this, and I'm actually going to be applying a label to this surface in here, which is going to be the screen behind that glass display. So this has already been colored in the scene tree here, but we can go ahead and select this face only and change the face level to be a different value or a different color, and that way we'll be able to apply that label only onto this surface, and this will be unlinked from the rest of this housing here. So I think that's it. We have all our parts with given colors here. We'll show our display, make sure that's there. But before we go ahead and import this into KeyShot, I want to show you guys something that we get some requests for in support. Seems to be an issue that people run into a lot. So if you go up to your options button here, or you can go tools, options, document properties, and image quality. So here you have your essentially your tessellation value for your part. Now this is the default setting here, is about midway, and this might be fine for the majority of your products, but if you have something with complex surfacing and curves like you can see here, we may want to crank this up. Now you can go into the red zone here, but be careful because the document size, the file size is going to be significantly increased, and the loading time into KeyShot and saving time is going to be a bit slower. So if you can, try and stay out of the red. So before we save this, let me bring up our KeyShot.com here and just show you where the SolidWorks plugin is located. So resources, downloads, and plugins. And scroll down here. If you have SolidWorks 2011 or 2012 and KeyShot 2 or 3, you can go ahead and download that. And once you have that installed, restart your SolidWorks or your modeling software, and you should have a button that shows up here. Oh, looks like we have to install it. So let's go back and continue that download. How's the volume? Hope everyone can hear me all right. Let me know if at any time I'm speaking too quietly or if I need to speak up. So let's install our plugin here. Okay, and we'll save this with all our colors applied, and we'll need to restart SolidWorks in order for that plugin to take effect. Well, looks like not quite showing up here. We'll have somebody work on that and find out what the issue is there. Bruno, you want to figure out what's going on with that? Okay, so let's go back up to our tessellation quality here. If you do crank this all the way up into the red, which might be necessary depending on your model, I wouldn't recommend importing using the plugin. It's more stable if you just import default into KeyShot using the import button. But for today, we'll probably be good around here. Another thing is you want to make sure you have this checked. Save your tessellation to the part document. Saves all that file information there, so when you bring it into KeyShot, you have that tessellation saved. And it's going to take a moment for that to rebuild and tessellate. So if we had our plug-in here, we might need to restart the computer. Actually, that might be the reason why it's not showing up there. Yeah, I just restarted SolidWorks. We probably have to restart the computer for that to take into effect. But for now, we actually have another, we have a beta importer that I want to show you in KeyShot here. If we go to import, and we could just select any file here, let me show you. If you click on your advanced settings here, actually this needs to be a part file, so let me just bring these headphones back in here. So if you bring in a part file, click on the Advanced tab, and then you'll see this tessellation quality adjustment here. Now, this only takes into effect if you have your new importer or beta importer checked. So this takes a little bit longer to load into KeyShot because KeyShot has to calculate all the triangulation and tessellation. So here I've already loaded it into the scene using the beta importer. Now, if you go to edit your material, we can change this to a wireframe material. This is pretty handy that a lot of people don't know exists, but this gives you a clear view of what that tessellation quality looks like there. And you can see in this the area where we have a large amount of curvature, we have very small triangulation, and that's going to be a great surface quality. But again, that increases your file size and decreases your time. So let's hide that. And we'll start a new session here. So since that plugin button isn't there in SolidWorks,
let's try to find it under Tools. Go to Tools in SolidWorks.
Okay, yeah, we can. That's a good point.
There you go.
Yeah, we don't.
Make sure you activate it there.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right, there you go. So if you aren't seeing your plugin button, your KeyShot button here in the top panel, you can go into your add-ins, or again, tools, add-ins, and make sure you have KeyShot 3 active and running on startup. Okay, there we go. So here's our KeyShot button, and if we go ahead, all you have to do is click render, and it should send these headphones right on over to KeyShot. Takes just a moment for that to load. Okay, so we have our colors that we applied in SolidWorks, and for a comparison, let's take a look at this in a wireframe, and you can see the triangulation of this part compared to this one is a significant difference. So if you're ever finding artifacts in your shadows, or you see rough lines, or your curves aren't as smooth as you would like them to be, you could either crank up that tessellation quality in SolidWorks, document properties, image quality, or you can use the beta importer with KeyShot and go under those advanced settings and crank that up there. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here, applying some materials and whatnot. But the first thing I like to do when working with a product shot is, usually I'll know what my final output will be, and I like to work with 720p aspect ratio. I'll set this to 960 by 540 and lock that aspect ratio. So that way when I go to render, I can render it at 1920 by 1080, and it'll fit the view of the display nicely. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started with our material assignment. Obviously this wireframe is not going to be our final material, so we'll change that. You can do that a couple of ways. You can double click that material to bring up your project window, and you can change the type, or you could bring up your library, which is toggled using M. So there's some pretty nice materials already created here in the KeyShot library. We have a soft touch gray. I'd like to use that for this rubberized kind of material. So these are some sport headphones, wireless sport headphones, and we wouldn't want this to be a hard or a smooth material that would slip on your hair or whatnot, so add a little bit of softness there. But so we have our roughness value here, which changes the roughness of the material. But if that's not enough, you can always add a texture. So here you can do this a couple ways. You can click the check mark to find a texture and load it up. You can go into your KeyShot materials library, find the texture you'd like, drag it on there, and when you do so, it gives you the option of adding it as a color, a bump, opacity, or a label depending on your material type and your texture applied. So we'll delete that for now. You can always delete your textures by selecting them here and clicking on your little trash can. But I have the textures that I've used here already saved in this folder, so I'm going to find the one I'd like. For this soft touch, I'm going to use a normal map. So here you can see this texture is kind of this bluish and purplish tone, and this is called a normal map. And a texture like this would be just a straight up bump map. Now the difference between those is the bump map just uses grayscale values and stores the height information for each pixel. So that way it simulates different levels of height without adding more geometry. Now with a normal map, it uses RGB values to provide a more accurate representation of that texture, and it actually stores the information not only for the height of each pixel but also the slope or the tilt of that pixel as well. So we can just drag this over here and release and add that as a bump. So if we double click on that material, go into our textures and our bump, we see we have it projected as a UV coordinate type. Now this is something that I rarely use, so for this case a box map should be fine. And if we zoom in here, you can see how that texture looks. So we'll probably want to bring down the scale of that, something a little bit finer, and also bump height, bring that down, maybe not quite so much. And then another value that you want to pay attention to is the roughness. So the bump height and your roughness, there's really a fine balance between the two. So you want to find, usually I'll just set a bump height which seems reasonable to me, and then I'll go back and end up adjusting the roughness a little later when I have my lighting applied in order to convey that material properly. So for now, we'll just leave this at 0.2 and move on. So let's go ahead and apply just a regular bump map to these pads. We can go into our materials library and search for something like rubber and apply that. So obviously these two pads were linked because I made them both black in SolidWorks, and changing the color of one is going to change the color of the other. Okay. For now, we'll keep those black. And again, we'll add a bump to that. So let's find our texture here. Drag it over. Sometimes it can be a little tricky to see what you're doing if you have this set to pure black. So what I like to do is maybe bring that down to a value of 20 or 15, and I can always adjust how dark I want that to be a little later once I have my lighting set up. So obviously the bump height on that is too high, and we have it set to UV coordinates. Box map should be fine. So let's see here. We want a scale of 1 looks about right. And we'll bump height looks okay too. Now this is going to be definitely a finer texture if this was a foam type material. And we could even go in here, take our same texture and apply it as an opacity map. If we go back to our bump and check sync here, it should sync up our two textures. Now this texture has way too much white information in there, and that's why it's making it pretty much transparent. But if we had a texture and we removed some of that white, you can imagine how it would show opacity through this foam material. But that's not working for today, so we'll remove that. And for these cases, that looks fine for now.
Could you explain one more time why you chose rubber versus soft touch?
It's really just a matter of preference in choosing your materials between the rubber and the soft touch. There's not a huge difference. The rubber is going to be a little more rough, but we brought that down, and you can see the rubber is actually a plastic material with black diffuse and a specular that probably could go darker in order to remove those highlights. And then for our soft touch material, this is also a plastic, so essentially they are the same material types, but here you can see the specular on the soft touch is a white, so it is going to have those white highlights. Something that is this kind of harder rubber material would show more highlights than the softer type of rubber. So essentially those are the same material types, and if I wanted to, say, apply this bump map to this pad, I can just go in here and unlink that material and change that to a black with a gray specular, and essentially that's the same thing as using the rubber material. I just wanted to show some materials in the KeyShot library, the stock materials that are helpful. So we'll undo that and continue working on our material assignments. So yeah, if we wanted to go in here to this housing and make this a plastic, change the color to a gray, and if we want this to be a high gloss plastic, we'll turn our specular all the way to white with our roughness all the way down to 0. Let's go in here. One of my favorite materials in KeyShot is the emissive, and if you've seen some of our webinars before, you might have seen this material. I'm going to change that to this kind of blue color here to indicate that our headphones are on, and you can bring that value up to produce a little more glow, but you really won't see any results from that now until you have it in the scene and have other things that it could be reflecting off of to show that light. For this Sony logo here, we'll also want to apply a bump to that, but we could probably just go into our materials library, find a brushed material, and bring that onto there. Double click your material to edit, and we'll go to our texture tab. We have that applied as a box map. The scale's a little big, so we can bring that down. And if you're familiar with the Sony logo, it has kind of this angled texture to it. I believe it's the other way, actually. We'll bring our bump height down a little bit. And actually our scale can be smaller as well. Okay, so we'll move on from there. We could actually decrease this roughness, get a little more shine to that material. Okay. Let's go into this bezel here and make this a metallic paint. Now, there's a lot of variables in this material, and some of the other materials such as advanced and others can get a little confusing. So if you ever run into this and have questions and need clarification on what these values do, always go to the manual or the online manual. This is something that I reference pretty much every day, and without it I would be lost, to be honest. So this is your best friend, and you should know where to find it. So here, if you go into material types and their settings, you can find all the material types here. We have a metallic paint, and it'll tell you exactly what each of these values do. It is a very helpful resource. I highly recommend keeping this thing at your side when using the software. Okay, so let's make that kind of a KeyShot blue here. Our base color is pretty much the overall color of the material, and the metal color is going to be the color of the flake of the material. That looks okay. And changing this coverage changes the amount of flake coverage on that material. And there's a lot of other parameters here, but we won't get into that for now. Feel free to play around with these and reference your manual. Find what works for you. Okay. Let's go ahead and save this just in case something happens. Always good to press Control S and save your file. As a student, I've been very frustrated working on a project the night before and forgot to save. Something happens. Always save, just to be safe. Okay, well, let's move on to this white plastic here. And this is a material that can be a little difficult to work with. We've had some customers requesting support in our forums and through our support website. So I'm going to show you a few tricks you can use to get this white plastic to really pop. So first step is setting the material. Obviously it's going to be a plastic type and a specularity of white, with our roughness turned down all the way. Now, if you open your advanced settings, you see this refraction index. So this might not show much of an effect now in this environment, but this is a value that you can increase to make the material appear a little more metallic and to really get that the high amount of reflections with a white plastic that you would get. So let's set that to 2. We can come back to that later to see how that effect takes place in an environment. Okay, so I think we are ready to get started on some lighting. But first we'll position our headphones here in a little bit more of an interesting way. So if we go into our scene, we can right click to move our object, and we can rotate it on either a local axis or a global axis. So when you first import your model, these axes are identical as long as your model was modeled in the center of your modeling software. So for now, this doesn't matter whether it's local or global, but it will once we move this. So we'll set it there for now and press that check mark. So if we go back into here and move this, now the rotate, you can see the local rotate is actually at an angle. So they are different. Once you move your part, it kind of resets that. So we'll exit out of that for now. I want to show you guys another little trick that I use a lot. People have a tough time making sure that their object or their part is resting on the ground plane here. You can kind of eyeball it if you come down here at a low angle, but you can see here there's still a little interference. A trick I've learned is to go into your camera tab, set this as orthographic, and look at it from a front or a side angle. This probably will work better. And if we go into our Environments tab and show the ground grid, you can actually see the exact location of the ground, and makes it a little bit easier to line that up. Often snap to ground doesn't find these two low points in order to make that accurate. So now we can just adjust this by eye, and you can see it's going to need a little more rotation here. Now this is a little tricky, but it doesn't have to be perfect as long as you know, it's not going too far underground there and getting cut off. So that looks okay for now. Forgot this material here. This is our screen, so this will be a glass material. And here we have another material. We can just apply this same color here. Again, unlink that and then apply our label. So here's just an image I found on Google Images. I typed in music visualizer and thought this would fit the theme nicely. Well, it's looking like added it to the wrong material here, so undo that. If we double click here, we can go here to our labels tab, check the checkbox and find our label this way. That way you know for sure it's going onto this surface. Now normal projection mode should work fine for this, and if we click position in the center of our object there, it will position it. And looks like the angle needs to be adjusted here. Because we've separated that inside surface, the label isn't spilling over into these other parts. So that looks good there. And we'll right click and show all parts to get that glass in there. So if you ever run into an issue like this, where you're seeing these two surfaces in direct contact, this is what we call Z-fighting. So in order to fix this, you could approach it in your modeling software and create a little gap between those surfaces. Or we could even do this in KeyShot by moving the part just a little bit to remove that. So we still have our glass set in there, but we moved it just enough so that those two, the inside surface of the glass and the surface the label is applied to, are not Z-fighting anymore. So let's hide our ground grid. We know that's positioned well. The image I showed you had two headphones in it, but looks like we're running low on time, so for now I think I can show you everything I need to with just one of these headphones in the scene here. So let's get started on our environment. The default environment is the startup HDR, which has very low contrast between the darks and the lights. You see we have a nice light ceiling, but it's not illuminating our product in a way that really highlights it. So what you want to do is find something that does have a lot of high contrast. So maybe something like this here. We could always press C to show color or E to show environment. And for those of you who don't know, K brings up the hotkey menu, and this is another very useful tool that you should refer to while using the software. So that environment isn't working too well. We can try one of these overhead panels. I personally like to use environments that have a darker shade on the floor with a lighter value on top. That way you have this this surface that's underneath is going to be darker than the surface that's on top. If we were to apply something with a white floor, you can see it illuminates this underside, and that's not really accurate for what we're trying to show here. So you can go ahead and rotate your environment using Control and the left mouse button. It helps to have a color back there so you're not distracted. So you can rotate this to find something you like. If, say, you like this reflection that comes across this corner here, these buttons are illuminated nicely, but this is too dark here. In the KeyShot 3.2 Pro version, you can go into your Environments panel and edit using the KeyShot HDR editor. So here we have the environment that we've applied, and we have our pins tab here where we can create new lights to add to the environment. Now before we do that, there's a little trick. If you want to start fresh with a blank environment, you can just simply turn down the brightness all the way and add pins one by one here to start lighting your scene. But real quick, let's go into Photoshop here. I want to show you how to create a starting point for your own environment. So if we open a new file, the environments use a 2:1 ratio. So we'll use 2000 by 1000. Okay. And let's go ahead and fill this with a black. And we'll create a gradient here in order to start with a black floor with a bright ceiling. So just using our eraser, we'll erase this mask. Make sure our brush is soft. Okay, so there's our gradient. Now, in order to open this in the KeyShot environment editor, we need to go up to our image mode and make sure that it's set to 32 bits, and we'll flatten this image. Then we'll be able to save it as an open EXR. So that way, when we go into KeyShot, we can go to our Environments tab here, click the Import button, and find this EXR on our desktop. And here it is. So we can start out with a black floor and a white ceiling. Gives a nice ambient lighting to our scene without applying any highlights or lowlights. So then let's go back into our editor here. We'll have to bring our brightness back up in order to show our scene. And set this up in a nice composition. Now, if we go, we're still in orthographic mode, that's why it's looking a little strange, but we'll go back to perspective here. And you can see it's pretty exaggerated. For product shots like this, often the photographer is farther away with a zoom lens. So usually 35 is a little too close for me. I like to do 50 or maybe 85, and then we can dolly back out and set that up there. So the lighting, setting up the lighting is definitely the trickiest part to this whole setup, and to working with KeyShot in general. So it might take a bit of time for you to find, where these pins should be located in order to achieve the right amount of highlights that you're looking for. And you can always adjust your values here, decrease the fall off to sharpen that highlight. We can decrease the size of that if we wanted to create a sharp highlight here, and we can bring up the brightness. So really, when lighting a scene like this, you want to make sure that the surfaces facing downwards are obviously darker than the surfaces that are facing towards the light. So it will take a little bit of fussing around and finding where these pins belong, but you can achieve a very nice shot once you do have those set up. So let's take a look back at the original scene here. For these high gloss materials, I like to put this gold reflection across the surfaces. If you can't quite control that in Photoshop or in KeyShot, it's pretty easy to add in Photoshop. But it's already almost 11 o'clock. Let's see if there's any questions about anything I've gone over today. Bruno, any questions?
Yeah, there's somebody who would like to know again what was done to the white plastic.
Okay, yeah, let's go back to this white plastic here. And there's a few little tricks in order to get these reflections and this high gloss look. So you definitely want your diffuse to be set as a white and your specular also white. That controls the color of the highlights. So if this is black, obviously it's a matte material. Most cases I just crank this to all the way up to white. Now if you click on this advanced tab here, you can see this refraction index, and the default value for plastic is 1.5, and you can see you're not really getting the same kind of highlights that you would if you were to turn it up. A little more definition in there. Gives it a bit more of a metallic look, but it really helps with some of these reflections. Now I know my lighting environment isn't set up properly here, and this would take a little bit of time to work out in setting those lights up. But another trick we could do is go over to our settings tab and just decrease the gamma a little bit. If we had more lights in our scene, it would look better, but bringing this gamma down also punches out those reflections a bit. I can show you that here. So the default value of gamma is 2, and you can see it's a little washed out. If we just bring that down to 1.5 or even 1.25, you start getting more definition of these reflections in the material. Now, if you do bring down your gamma, you'll also have to adjust your blacks. You probably don't want this to be a totally black value, or else you can't see any detail in there. Okay.
And then also, we go over the different ways in which you can improve shadow quality.
Sure. So somebody has a question about shadow quality. Let's take a look. We'll close our environment editor here. So let's take a look at our scene. First of all, something I didn't address is the environment size. If we take a look at our environment here and zoom all the way out, you can see this sphere that is created by the HDR. Usually what I like to do is decrease the size of the sphere so it seems like the product is in the same kind of world as the environment. You get more accuracy in your lighting when you're adjusting the pins in your editor. You have more control with a smaller environment. And so let's set this to 10, and then we can go back and show our color. Oops. So once you have your environment set, another important value is your ground size here. So if you bring the ground size down, you can see this edge here where basically the ground is getting cut off. So you want to make sure, well, that in your product view you're not seeing that line created by the environment. Maybe if we look at this with a different environment, you have a more clear view. So here you can see the shadows created from the environment and the product are getting cut off because the ground size is too small. So you want to keep your ground size as small as you can without those shadows getting cut off. If we increase this, then it fades out into the background, but we still have a small ground size, and that basically condenses the amount of pixels for the shadow underneath your object. So the shadow is going to have a higher quality if you reduce that ground size. You could also go into your settings tab and increase the shadow quality in the real-time view. So yeah, let me address that. The project window here in your settings tab, the quality settings here, this is only for your real-time view. You're going to need to, if you have a shadow quality of 3 set here, when you go to render, you want to make sure your shadow quality is also reflected there. But first of all, make sure that the ground size is as small as you can get it without getting that shadow clipping, and that'll help a lot with your shadow quality without increasing your render time, giving the system more calculations by increasing this shadow quality here. Another thing is global illumination is something you want to have checked if you have, say, a material like this. You can see it's the light bouncing off of this blue is then hitting the gray, so that increases the amount of realism, but depending on what you'd like to show in your scene, you may or may not want to use that. And then our ground illumination is kind of the same thing, except the light is bouncing off of the product and then onto the ground. So usually I keep these checked, but again, it just depends on what you're trying to convey in your image. Any other questions?
Somebody's wondering about importing from Rhino and the best format in doing so to avoid missing surfaces. And so I don't know if you have any experience with Rhino.
Okay, well, someone has a question. Importing parts from Rhino into KeyShot seems like they're missing some surfaces, and we've run into issues like this in the past. I use SolidWorks mostly, but what I would recommend is trying to create solids from your forms and not having separate surfaces comprising your form, and that just helps when importing. It's a little more simple for KeyShot to understand. And then you can always try saving as an IGES or a step file. Those seem to be some pretty good formats to import. Shouldn't have many problems with those. All right, so if there's not any other questions, it's 11 o'clock. I hope that this has been helpful to you guys, and I'd like to see some work. So if anyone uses this webinar to render your own white plastic, please post your image up on the forum. Anyone can join the forum. Just go to keyshot.com, community, and our forum here, and you can share your shots. If you have something you're proud of, please post it up, and we'd be happy to comment and give you some help. So until next month's webinar, thank you very much.